Tell us a story.
So my book is The Letter, My Journey Through Love, Loss, and Life by Marie Tillman.
Oh, is it a true story?
It is.
What? Who's Marie Tillman?
I'm going to tell you.
Oh, okay.
So this book is broken up into 3 parts.
Is this like her writing it?
It is.
Oh.
Yes. So this book starts out that Marie is talking about how she's at work. And she lives in Washington State. She's going to work. It's like any other day. And these 2 officers from the military walk in. And the receptionist knows who they're for. Like, know who they're to see. And so the receptionist comes and gets Marie and says, there's 2 guys that want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. And she immediately knows what it's about. Like, that they are here for her.
It's about her husband.
It is.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
So.
Starting off strong but stressful.
Yeah. So.
Where are the tissues?
They're right there. Don't worry. And so they tell her, like, we hate to tell you this, but your husband has been killed. Can I say that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or passed, yeah.
Passed.
Has died.
And she immediately freezes. Like, no one can really prep you for that, I feel like, and you kind of just, that's how you handle it. So she quickly gathers her stuff. They drive her home. And as they're driving, she just keeps telling herself, like, this isn't real. Once she gets home, she realizes that she has to call her in-laws. Mm-hmm. Because she doesn't want them to hear from, like, anyone else. And so she decides to do that. Mm-hmm. And then this book goes into the first part. So that was kind of like...
So, like, the prologue?
Yes. Yes, so then it goes backwards.
Okay.
And so then it introduces her husband. So his name is Pat Tillman. And some would know that he played for the Arizona Cardinals. Oh. So he was huge in the NFL. And stopped his career to go to the military. Everybody was surprised, like, wait, what? Like, you're in the prime of your... Like, he was 27. He was in the prime of his...
Like, you don't have to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it flashes back, it kind of talks about how they grew up in California, kind of by San Francisco. They lived in the same city. She kind of grew up in more of, like, the city, and he grew up more in the country. But they knew each other. They went to the same school. They were friends with the same people, but never really had, like, an interest in each other till they were older. And so, like, when they got to high school, they started hanging out together, and their mutual friends could all see that there was, like, something. Oh, you like him, he likes you, come on. And so they did that, and Pat and Marie kind of just became best friends. So then they just kind of were always together, and that's just kind of how it went. They were very different. Pat was a athlete, outgoing, kind of what you would think the typical football player is. And Marie was very, like, quiet, kind of timid. School was important. School was not as important to Pat.
Like, introverted.
Uh-huh.
Extroverted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but like they say, they kind of just clicked. And so, talks about a time when it was during high school, like his senior year. They went to a party and he thought that someone was making fun of his friends. And so he went and beat up that person.
Whoa.
But what really happened is that it was the other way around. And so he got charged with that and he had to go to juvie. So that kind of is their first separation. And she talks about how he could have fought it, but he totally took responsibility and was like, I did this. I deserve the consequences. It's going to affect me, but this is what I'm going to do. And I want to say he was able to graduate high school, but then he had to go to juvie. And so they would write letters to each other and kind of how they stayed connected. He would talk about how kind of rough it was in there, but he knew that it wasn't forever. Mm-hmm. Like he in his letter he said, some of these guys, like, this is just like one stop on there. Mm-hmm. And so he was just grateful that it was only for a short time, and then they would be able to kind of begin their life together. Mm-hmm. After he got out of juvie, it was kind of college. Marie decided she wasn't quite ready to, like, totally fly the nest. So she went to school in California, and he decided to go to Arizona. And so he was playing, he went to Arizona State. So he was playing football for Arizona State, so he could not travel as much as she could. So she was constantly going to Arizona to see him, do all of that, see him play, and so...
And at this point, are they, like, dating, or are they just friends?
No,
so
they're
they
dating.
are officially
yes,
dating.
yeah. And that kind of happened, like, their senior year, and then kind of just kept going. And so they truly were just, like, doing the school thing. He's playing football. I'm doing school. They just did that for, like, 5 years before they even talked about getting married or anything of that. He got called to play for the Cardinals for Arizona, which is huge.
Amazing.
Like, that's a huge accomplishment. Huge, like, coming from a football wife, like, that's huge. At that time, she decided, okay, it's time for me to move to Arizona. We're not, like, that's where our life will be.
Mm-hmm.
So she moved, did that, and then he just kind of played, and then 9/11 happened. Which kind of changed, like, it changed everyone.
Everything, yeah.
And so at that time, he decided that he was going to enlist. So he put his NFL career on hold and went to enlist. And then he had a brother who was maybe like 2 years younger than him. Everybody knew that if Pat enlisted, Kevin would enlist, because that's his brother's name. And so that's kind of where part 1 kind of ends, is that he has enlisted. So then part 2 kind of talks about how they have decided to get married, because they know he's going to get deployed, so they're going to get married. They have like 2 weeks to get married before he gets deployed, so they get married, they go on their honeymoon, and then he gets deployed. Mm-hmm. And she kind of just talks about how at first it's just like he's gone, they can't communicate or anything like that. So they send letters to each other, and she kind of has to learn, like, okay, like, I guess I gotta figure out who I am, like, I gotta figure out how to do this alone for a little bit.
How long had they been married at this point?
Like, not even a year.
So they don't even have kids yet?
Mm-mm. Nope. And that was kind of, they had talked about having kids, but that was, because he was only gonna be in the military for I think it was like 3 years, because he went maybe to be a ranger, I think. And so they didn't have to serve as long. And they had talked about having kids, but not yet. Like, they wanted to have this done, and then they would have kids. They moved to Washington, because that's where they're going to be stationed. And so she, she finds them a house, she sets that all up, she does all of that. Pat and Kevin are both deployed, and they know that when they get back, they're all going to be living together. And so she does that, and they come back, and they just kind of get into a routine, and then he gets deployed again. But this time it's to Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And neither of them, yes.
Both brothers?
Both brothers.
Okay.
Pat isn't a fan of the war, but he is in support of, doing honor for your country. So he gets deployed to Afghanistan. Then it kind of flashes forward to when he passes away. And she is going through things in, they've done the funeral, they've done all of that. She's kind of just, it's the first time she's been alone at her house. She's doing all of this. And she finds a letter. And this is why I loved this book. So she finds this letter, and it's a just-in-case letter. Mm. And for me, that was one of those things that I was like, oh, so that if something happens unexpected and you're not able to say goodbye, you have, a last. Mm-hmm.
Something from him.
She doesn't read the entire letter. She doesn't write about the entire letter in the book. But the one part that she talks about is that he writes in the letter, just live. And she said that hit her super hard. Okay, I really do have to.
Keep going.
It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to keep going. So she does that. So that's kind of why it's called the letters, because she refers back to it. Occasions arise that she thinks of this letter, just live. That was his final word, just live. And so she kind of takes that as her, motto of her life. I'm just going to live. There's one part in the book that talks about that she flew from Washington to Delaware to meet, like, his body. And she talks about how waiting for him for that, Kevin, the brother, was on that flight. So they kind of have a moment of that. So when he first passed away, they told him that he was shot by enemy fire. But then it turns out that it was not that. She describes it better than I ever will, but they were doing some sort of training, like, kind of go find enemy, I guess. And one, like, their group divided into two, and one went this way and one went this way. And there was miscommunication, and so they, like, this group fired on this group, and that's what happened.
Oh, no.
But you don't find that out until, like, the middle of the book, and it just becomes this huge thing that, like, the military tries to hide it.
Mm.
Or that's her perspective, like, they're trying to hide it because they don't want that to get out. Mm-hmm. But this is what really happened. And so she talks about, for like 2 years, she's trying to get copies of autopsies. She's trying to do, like, meet with people.
Answers.
And yes, and they end up having to go to, I kind of envision it as one of those, like, a hearing, kind of like a hearing from the Senate. And so they tell their side, they tell theirs, and you kind of, like, come to an agreement. And as she's doing this, in her mind, she keeps hearing this, like, just live. And she feels torn because she's trying to keep going, but she still feels tied to this. So they kind of do that, and she keeps in contact with his mom, and his mom's whole job now is to figure out what really happened. And so as she's trying to, kind of live her life, she moves to New York. She quits her job in Washington, moves to New York just to kind of start fresh. She works for ESPN, is traveling, kind of doing all of those things, but still getting pulled back to this. And that kind of is just her story a little bit, is how she chose to live. Even though it was hard, she chose to keep going. And then kind of near the end of the book, she talks about going to Thanksgiving, how it's kind of awkward because it's his family, but she sees, like, his mom there, and
like,
she's
you feel
kind
close to him
of
still.
yeah. And so she, like, sees his mom, and they don't really know what to talk about because he's not there. And Kevin, the brother, has a new girlfriend, and so he's trying to rebuild his life. And she just talks about, truly at the end of it, she just talks about that, like, I'm just living. That's what I'm doing. And that's kind of where the book ends. And I just thought it was the reason I chose it is because I thought it was such a sweet, like, if something happens, you can, like, it won't ever be the same, but you can do what you can to keep living. And I loved the concept of a just in case letter. Like, I remember telling my husband after I read it for the first time, like, will you write me a just in case letter? Something happens, just write it. I'll have it. I'll write you one, like, just in case. I kind of did a little bit of research about her after, like kind of what happened of her life. She is married. She started a foundation. It's called the Pat Tillman Foundation. They're all about military and education and kind of how to help soldiers after they come home. So she runs that. She has kids. So yeah, she's just kind of
a beautiful, real story.
Yes.
About how life continues on after grief.
Yep. Yeah. So that's my story.
Cool.
And I didn't do it justice, but
we never do.
I know, but that's why people have the opportunity to read it themselves.
yeah.
So a message to the listeners, write a letter.
Yep. Yes. But yeah, there it is.